All right, thanks a lot, Gerhard. Yeah, that's me. Thanks a lot for introducing me. And I know lots of you guys, and for those who I'm just meeting for the first time, that's great. This presentation, FME and throwing off the spatial blinders, is all about thinking beyond spatial. That's really what Gerald, who actually wrote the presentation, couldn't be here today. That was his intention, Gerald Dotson, going beyond spatial. Gerald Dotson is a senior data architect at Grant County Public Utilities District, and he's been using FME for quite a while. And great guy. If you can ever see him present, super funny. Unfortunately, couldn't be here today. So I'm going to do my. Does anybody know Gerald? Does anybody know Gerald? Okay, then this is the best version of Gerald that you'll see. My imitation of him. So Grant PUD. They're actually a non-for-profit utility. I didn't know those existed, but they are one. They have a couple hydroelectric dams. They're out in the desert in Washington. I always think of Washington like Seattle with all the rain pouring down, but if you go on the other side of the Cascade Mountains, there is a desert basically. So they have 2 hydroelectric dams. They generate tons of power, 800,000 homes they can power. Lots and lots of cable, pipe, or sorry, not pipe, but lines for distribution, and 64,000 power poles, which is more power poles than I can even imagine, but they have that many. So that's a bit about them. Now, first thing I do is jump into spatial, right? And you're going, what? This was supposed to be not about spatial. Okay, so this is like, Dale, I think it's Dale, our founder, likes to say that sometimes people will land and then expand. And so FME often lands in a spatial niche and then will expand, and that's basically what we're going to talk about today. So the first place it landed was here. This organization, Grant PUD, has lots of pole data, lots and lots of pole data that is, well, of poles that are aging. 64,000 poles, remember? And they're out there, they're old, they need to be replaced. And to replace one costs $3,000. If you can replace another one in the same area at the same time, it's only $1,000. Ha ha. So they said $2,000 savings per pole. They said, we need to visualize this data, and they got FME specifically to make a KML, to make a Google Earth view, and then they could visually figure out where to plan their maintenance activities. So this was the start of it for this organization, and basically it paid for itself right there. But that got to Gerald thinking, well, FME has over 400 different formats, and at least 20% of them are kind of non-spatial formats. So he said, well, if they're there, maybe we should use them. And the rest of this presentation is really about opportunities and about pursuing opportunities when you see them. And I'm going to play a clip here from The Man from Snowy River, which apparently is based on an Australian poem. Our AV friend at the back filled me in on. Thumbs up. So we're going to play this. And think about pursuing opportunities as we play this. So that clip, anybody seen the movie, Man from Snowy River? A couple people. Yeah, you've seen it. So it looks like a great movie. I haven't seen it myself, but it's nice. So what do we see there? We see the terrain gets difficult. Most people, they pull up, they stop, right? But one rider flies through. He accelerates over that terrain. Why does he do it? Why does he do it? There's 2 reasons that Gerald thinks. He's on the right horse, and he knows from experience what that horse can do. That's the 2 things that Gerald points to for pursuing opportunities. Now we're going to jump into how Grant PUD, what the opportunities were. And the first one started with them replacing their GIS and their financial system at the same time. 2 new systems. Hey, this sounds like a lot of fun. I don't know if you've replaced systems before. It always goes smoothly. But one of the things they had to do was, and it was a go, no go, that's the way they describe it, the GIS materials list on a project had to be able to come over into the financial system. So the material list is a design material list. So when they design new lines with transformers and cables and all these sort of things to distribute the electricity, that list from GIS, from the design team, needs to be able to come into the financial system like easily. So the consultants on both sides, GIS and on the financials, were like, yeah, no worries, got this. And A few weeks later, nothing. A few months later, well, still nothing. Then they come back and they say, this is really hard. See, they had thought it was like a one-to-one table match. You just take a table from the design, CAD, whatever, bring it over, and you pop it into the financial. Should be a one-to-one table. However, it wasn't that simple. So they said, we need more resources, we need more money, we need more time. And Gerald, just like the rider, he put his hand up and he said, I think FME can do this. And what do you think they said? What do you think they said? What is FME? What is FME? Of course they said that. And they basically said to him, okay, we don't really know what you're talking about. We got consultants, whatever. 2 weeks, if you can do a proof of concept, then we'll actually care about it. Basically, they were waiting for him to kind of fail. They thought, we'll try it out, see how it goes. I'll get into the details a bit more about what he had to prove. And it started with the source GIS system, AutoCAD, Map 3D on Oracle. That was the new system they're bringing in. And the target system was Microsoft Dynamics GP on SQL Server. So they had these two systems, and they needed to move the data from one to the other. Now, on the left, you can see their material list that gets designed by the engineering team in the field. It needs to come into 3 different tables here. The first one is a summary of the design cost. The second table is a summary of the line segments, the cost at each line segment. And then the third table is the stock for each line segment. So what actual parts are you going to use on the line segment? So these 3 tables need to be created out of one. Maybe that's not the hardest part. However, the design was always being updated. Because you can imagine you're putting in a new property there. You can run a line up the road and around to the property, which looks really nice, but is more costly than just running a line directly. So they're always altering the design on the GIS side, which means they have to do inserts, updates, and deletes on this side. So there's always this kind of churn going on in the designs. And the consultants couldn't figure it out. However, Gerald was able to do that proof of concept in 2 weeks. He was able to create web pages with FME Server that the GIS folks doing the design would come on, they would select the version of the project that they wanted to push, their design, and they would validate it, make sure that on the GIS side it's valid, and then they would push it into the financials. It was all done with workspaces, so it was possible, and kind of blew them away. So this is, everybody has to have a slide where you can't actually tell what's going on, right, Roger? That's right, yeah. We're not supposed to do this, but that's the way it is. This is the actual workspace he put up there. And as Gerald says, it does violate Don's 10 transformer rule. So he admits he has a problem, we'll say. No. What this does is it moves the data from GIS, and he can't actually push directly into SQL Server. What he had to do is push to a web service for Microsoft Dynamics. So at first they thought they could go Oracle to SQL Server, but within this 2-week period it evolved very quickly, and he was able to still push to the web service. So able to set that up within a 2-week period. This workspace is called by a parent workspace. So there's a parent that actually does all the web page generation and the interaction. That calls this workspace to do the actual data movement. So he's got a parent for sort of the logistics, the web page, and then this workspace for actually moving the data. So this got Gerald and the folks at Grant thinking, maybe we should put more things in FME. Maybe we should push, because every time they do an OS upgrade, they have to test all their code, things break. They thought maybe we'll get someone else to do that. Maybe we'll get SAFE to do that, FME to do that. Maybe we can start to use one tool for all the data validation, the logic, the user-based decisions. The ball started going. And that's when they had another need. They had a need to create to replace their customer information system. So the customer information system that they put in place is Oracle's customer care and billing. And it's a critical system for them. It handles every aspect of the customer lifecycle. The start of service, the payment processing, invoice generation, internal and external transactions, even billing based on the meters that are read, posting those bills externally to be mailed. All of this is based on this system. It's a critical system. So what they did is all these systems around around this sort of central, can't really see my cursor. Anyway, so all of these systems around need to integrate and touch that CIS, that customer information system. So what they did is they wrapped up FME as the interface for all of those different systems. So no data gets in or out of that system without going through FME. Now, what was it before? It was all hand-coded integrations. And so they moved away from that. Pretty impressive, and I'll give you some examples of what they did. In this case, it's a bit hard to see, but this is an integration. We're going back to Spatial now. But it's an integration between their GIS system and their customer information system. Imagine if a transformer goes down out there, power goes out for somebody. Or a line goes down, the power goes out for a series of customers. They need to know from that transformer, from that service point, which customers are affected. And they need to know maybe some of those customers are on life support, for example. So if they're on life support, they need to prioritize the actual, repair of that service. Now, the challenge is that the hard assets, the transformers, and the service points are stored in GIS, but in the customer information system is the information about who lives at those service points, who's the occupant in that building. So they needed, basically the challenge is if you add a new transformer to GIS, that information needs to come across and get into the customer information system. And the same thing as if you put a new occupant in to a premises, that goes into the customer information system. That information needs to then be propagated. Some aspect of it needs to be propagated to the GIS. So they used an FME workspace to interface these systems. One example. Here's another example with back to their financial system, but more specifically their banking. They need to reconcile their banking information with their financials. They get a report from the bank. The bank says, we received this much money from you. They need to reconcile that with their financial system. And their financial system is Dynamics GP, Microsoft's product. However, the two systems don't have common, basically, IDs. You can't very easily match them. You had to get another report from the CIS, which broke down the payments. Anyway, basically, you got 3 different reports, and it would take an accountant 8 hours per week to match up the bank reports of the financial system. It was really quite brutal. So what they did is they added another interface in here to take the report that's coming out of CIS, or that customer information system, and explode it into a format which would be a tender format, which would be, you could reconcile the banking information very easily. So they took the information needed in CIS and pushed it out to Dynamics, adding a new interface. Now it's only 30 minutes per week for the accountant. So pretty non-spatial, I would say, but helping the accounting department. This one blew my mind when he told me they were doing this. The CIS system itself does batching. Quite a few applications in the evening will take any data that's collected and sort of batch it up and process it and then get ready for next day's business. This particular CIS, when it does the batching, doesn't give you any feedback on success or failure or anything. It just either works or it doesn't. And the repercussion of a failed batch is that there's a complete stop of all work related to the CIS. And that means the repercussions there are the customer accounting group, the customer service representatives, and 5 customer-facing business offices all stop working. So they get in the morning, 8 a.m. with their coffee or whatever, and they say, oh, to about 25 people, you're not going to be able to work. So pretty harsh. And at a minimum, it took several hours to resolve that. So That's a pretty big impact. 2 hours times 25, it's 50 hours if that goes down. That's a huge deal. So what they used FME server for, ingenious, they knew that they could look at the Oracle batching jobs, and if they go beyond a certain length of time, they can infer that as a failure, or there's going to be a problem. So what they do with FME server and a workspace is they go and look at that system, check for runtimes that are anomalous, and then they notify IT in the evening hours before the start of business. Since they've done this, they have caught every single batching problem that has occurred since they've started this. So instead of 50 hours every once in a while, it's 0 hours. It's never a problem. Sure, IT needs to wake up early, but you know, that's okay. Doing okay for time? Yeah? Okay. So a couple more. This one's not related to the CIS, but it's basically non-spatial as well. One of their dams is on the Columbia River, and as part of their plan and their deal with the government, they have to do some reporting on the stream. They have to report on temperature, they have to report on river height, they have to report on things called dissolved gases. So the spillway that spills the water out creates a big waterfall which pushes gases into the water, and the longer they're in suspension, the longer they will actually dissolve, and you have these atmospheric gases. So their requirement is to report on gases and other things hourly, daily, and monthly. That was their requirement. So inside the river along the different segments, they have probes. The probes are set up, collect the data, and automatically push it to a database, which is nice. Pushes it to a database. In the past, what they would do is they would export that data to spreadsheets, and then they would put macros in to do a bunch of calculations, averages, fancy 12, 24-hour averages, stuff that some of you will know better than me. But there were these problems sometimes when a probe had an error. And if the probe had an error, you would get these anomalous values. And it would take basically 5 hours per week of a biologist's time to look at the spreadsheets, check that there was no errors, and it would just, 5 hours per week, biologist time, just spreadsheets, spreadsheets, spreadsheets. So they smelled opportunity again. They took FME. Now FME goes to the database, grabs that data out, does the validation, does the calculations, you don't need the macros, and it pushes it up to the web for sharing. So it does all of that, and it saved 5 hours of biologist time. So another great use. This is a really cool thing they're doing here. With any workspace that's monitoring a system or running in general, really, where there's an error that occurs, what they do is they identify, oh, there's an error occurring, and then they email the person, the IT or the support personnel for that system, and say there's an error here in your system, and here are the corrective steps to make the change. And so here's an example of one of these emails, just sending out, I think it's something to do with water quality files. Yeah, so it didn't create some files because there were some problems. Emails the person that has the challenge, has the steps that they need to follow. They log in, they fix it, and then off they go. So I thought that was a really cool example of how to really move it forward, give a person a next step. So in summary, the meat and the idea, the thing to take away is that FME is great for spatial, of course, but there are so many opportunities to go beyond that. And, just like Gerald, you can maybe put your hand up when you smell that opportunity, and put your hand up and then do a proof of concept. Do something like that. Try something simple. It could be a big deal in your organization, and it really could make a big difference. So. Yeah, that's my presentation. Thanks to Gerald, of course, for this great material. And I think we'll open it up to questions, and I'll do my best to answer any questions you have.
Thanks a lot, Aaron,
Okay.
for that talk. And
Thank you.
I would have a question.
Yeah.
Like, what was there? You said Gerald Dotson wanted to use FME for that, and nobody knew about it.
Yeah.
So how did he convince people? Like, what was his argument? Maybe
Yeah.
you know something about that.
Yeah.
How would you say I want to use FME for something like that if nobody even knows about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think for him, the proof for them was in the pudding and actually showing the proof of concept. I think they didn't really necessarily expect him to have success, but he was able to put it together. Like he knew he had the tool for the job. He knew from experience it could do it, and he went at it. And I think that's the best way. Do something simple to prove it, because we get that question a lot from organizations. How do I say, show that I can get FME server or they can get FME, that it's worth it? And the best way is to show them, I think. The best way is to show people. Yeah. Yeah.
So do we have any more questions?
Yep.
Are there any issues with supporting the actual integration piece of that along the line? I mean, is he the guy that everybody has to call if something goes wrong with the FME job? If it's so embedded into all of those processes, I'm just wondering if something that
Yeah.
we struggle with at our organization too is that we do a lot of great things, but then if there is something that goes wrong with that actual FME job, then there's only a couple of people that really know how to go in and troubleshoot that. So I just wonder about the
Yeah.
long-term support of it.
Yeah, who's responsible for the integration? I mean, I don't know that. What I would say is what they had before were these custom written interfaces, and they found that there was no chance of anybody being able to help because they'd all moved on. Whereas with this, at least they have Gerald, or I think it's maybe easier even to learn and work on an FME workspace. But who actually does it is a good question. I don't know, do you guys have similar concerns? Anybody have a strategy for this, or are they just the person that they get called? Anybody have? Yeah, they're like, I'm the I, they call me, right? That's why I'm here, I'm at the conference, right? Yeah, it's a good question.
All right, then thank
All right.
you again, Gerald.
Thanks a lot, guys.